Heaven C15 Radio begins in 3, 2, 1.
Today's headlines are... Okay, we don't have any headlines. If you haven't already noticed, this isn't a real radio show. But if it were, I would say I'm your host, AJ Diaz. Be sure to check out my blog, pevency15.blogspot.com. Without further ado, Richard Dawkins and his God Delusion will be the topic of discussion in this broadcast. Richard Dawkins wrote the book The God Delusion, trying to prove that God is a delusion. He seemed in this book to be attempting to refute any evidence for God and, well, give evidence for atheism, which I think he did very unsuccessfully. What I'm going to do is go over the central argument of his book. In his book, he tries to establish evidence that God is delusion, and he basically summarizes his arguments on pages 157 to 158. So if you have a copy of the God Delusion, go get it. 157 and 158. Dawkins calls this the centerpiece of his argument. The argument consists of 6 premises. Number 1, the most contemplated fact of the mind is the incredible design we see in nature. Alright, I couldn't argue with that. Well, I don't think it's the most contemplated fact, but we do see incredible design in nature. Richard Dawkins is right about that, and that sounds like a Dawkins anomaly or something, because he's saying there's incredible design and then he denies the designer, but we'll see why. Premise 2 states the natural temptation of this fact is to attribute this design to a designer. Yeah, that is the natural temptation. If I was walking through a park and saw someone's laptop on the floor that they had left there, I see the laptop, I know that someone designed it. That's the natural temptation, and that's not a false temptation. But he says in premise 3 that it is a false temptation because who designed the designer? Of course, if something's designed, we must know who designed the designer, or it's not designed. No, that's not true. Because if I was walking through the park, saw the laptop, and inferred that there is a designer, I wouldn't have to know who the designer was or where the designer came from or anything like that, because there's element of design in the thing. I know there's a designer. Initially, I don't need to explain what designer or how the designer got there. That is a non-issue. And especially in the case with God, if you're arguing from the Big Bang cosmology, for example, that the universe had a cause, well, that would have to God would be the best explanation for that, and he must necessarily exist, therefore he must exist eternally. And why would you ask if an eternal God had a creator? Because it's not that he doesn't have a creator, it's that he cannot have a creator, and that is the God of the Bible, who is eternal and cannot have a creator. So there's no point in going into the who designed the designer argument. That's just a dumb argument. And that was his main that's one of his main arguments. So let's go into premise 4. The most ingenious and powerful explanation is that of Darwinian evolution by natural selection. I'm surprised he didn't throw in mutations there, because I don't know. Thought he was a neo-Darwinist. Anyway, I'm sure he is actually. Anyway, I don't know what he means by that premise. I know he's very dogmatic on his belief that evolution is just a fact and cannot be refuted by science or anything. He thinks it's just a fact, and he's very dogmatic on that. It's just show me evidence, someone. You can't give me one transitional form. So that's a whole other topic of discussion. But science is something that has to be repeated, tested, observed. We have never done that with Darwinian evolution. And natural selection helps preserve a species, not create new kinds. Alright, let's just go on to premise 5. We'll get into the evolution debate another time. Premise 5 says we don't have an alternative to the beginning of the universe, but physics is working on it. So he's bringing up the beginning of the universe because evidence for the beginning of the universe is overwhelming. So what he's basically doing is, it's interesting because he accuses a lot of Christians of God of the gaps, or theists of God of the gaps, but look what he's doing now. He's using science of the gaps, or something or rather. He's saying, well, physics is working on it even though we don't know. And he says that all the time. So Richard, if you're going to accuse Christians of God of the gaps, then you're going to have to accuse yourself of your ignorance of the gaps, or whatever you want to call it. And his premise 6 states, but we should maintain hope that physics will figure it out, and it will hopefully be as powerful as Darwinian evolution. He has a lot of faith in science. He really thinks that it's going to figure out the beginning of the universe, which it has. There's conclusive evidence that the universe began to exist sometime in the finite past and therefore has a beginning. But obviously, Richard Dawkins doesn't want to believe that. That is willful ignorance. And then he concludes these 6 premises with the famous quote from his book, "Therefore, we can almost certainly conclude that God does not exist." Now, that statement in and of itself posits a logical contradiction, because here he is in the first 6 premises just utterly denying that God exists and then saying, "Therefore, we almost certainly know." It is really a logical contradiction. And he is really dogmatic. I watched a video of him on CNN the other day, and he said there is not one shred of evidence for God, and now he's saying God almost certainly doesn't exist. He's really contradicting himself there. So if you're atheist and you're watching this, don't take everything I've said at face value. Make sure. Pick up the God Delusion and read pages 157 and 158. Also, be sure to check out my blog, pevency15.blogspot.com. So far, I have quite a few atheists hanging around there, commenting on stuff, and it's been pretty fun over there. And make sure you check out inthelightnow.com. inthelightnow.com. If you go on that, make sure you click on the forums and join the forums. I'm a global moderator there, and there's lots of good discussions with a lot of atheists and evolutionists, different things. If you're a Christian, go there especially, because we need more Christians there. We have like over 100 members. We're just starting it out, but most of them are atheists. We need some more Christians there, so make sure you check that out, inthelightnow.com. Thanks for listening to this radio broadcast, or should I say YouTube broadcast. I'm your host, AJ Diaz. See you next time.